Tonight on CBR News, the Avengers destroyed the planet? When the Avengers reversed the blip, initially, the world rejoiced. Loved ones were reunited, and a sense of normalcy returned to the world. However, that joy soon turned to horror. We now have never-before-seen footage of what took place the moment of the blip, and I must warn you, the footage may be horrific. This moment is one of many that took place across the planet, and we have to ask, especially with where the world is today, should the Avengers have left things the way they were? More on this at 10. What is it that happened post-Blip that's making us ask the question, are the Avengers truly the hero of this story? Should have the damage Thanos caused been left alone? Let's start at the beginning, mere moments after Hulk snapped his fingers, because I can tell you that what Cap experienced is widely different than the rest of the world. In episode 4 of WandaVision, we're reintroduced to Sword Agent Monica Rambeau as she awakes from what seems like a dream. However, we know from the sight of what used to be dust that it's her returning from the blip. Only seconds later, we hear what sounds to be screams. As she makes her way to investigate, we witness pure chaos as an already at-capacity hospital now deals with former patients making their return to the living. Hospital staff rush around trying to contain the situation. Blip staff members are only concerned with calling their loved ones. And this is only a slice of the problem. A key concept of what's called the blip is that everyone who was snapped away returned exactly to the spot they left. So if this one hallway is in a state of madness, imagine the state of the rest of the hospital. In the scene, we see one of the Vanishing appear on the hospital gurney, as it was likely being rushed to an incoming ambulance. Now that gurney is filled, and that individual is likely carrying the same injuries they originally had, and whoever's coming in, well, better luck next time. We can speculate something similar happened on the operating table, emergency room, the NICU, etc. There is an inherent lack of resources, both in equipment and staff. Also, this is not only taking place in this hospital, but worldwide. Immediately after seeing this scene, I could only imagine the airlines who were at capacity now possibly having double the people aboard and need to make emergency landings. What if the plane was flying international and was in the middle of the Pacific? Or, as some have speculated, reappeared not in the plane but in the sky? On streets and highways, multi-car pileups likely ensued nationwide as individuals made their surprise return to an unexpected driver. Or, sadly enough, hit an unexpected pedestrian who returned to the crosswalk they got dusted on. We could go on and on providing examples of where people returned and the problems that caused. But what it comes down to is that as quickly as people returned, many were likely injured or suffered even worse. With hospitals over capacity and emergency services spread thin, the help simply wasn't there for a mass unextinction event. It doesn't stop there either. Families who had to deal with the loss of a loved one now have that person back in their life. It sounds great until you consider they likely moved on, if you know what I mean. Talk about an awkward conversation to tell your kid, who's now 5 years older. Then there are those on the other side of the spectrum, hoping and praying that the one they loved came back, only to find out they lost their life in the process of being unsnapped. Not only did they have to hold their funeral and say goodbye once, they would now have to do it all over again. All this is only Earth too. We have yet to consider the day one effects of the blip across the universe that would be similar to what we've mentioned so far. Things would likely be even worse on planets who are less fortunate than Earth, and unfortunately, this would only be the beginning of their worries. After the initial snap, the universe faced many issues that to this day have yet to be resolved. With everyone now alive and kicking, things would only get worse as the world itself was not ready for full capacity. It was barely stable for half. Let's begin to move from everyone's day zero into week one and possibly what the world will be dealing with for years to come. When Thanos did the dirty deed, of course the world fell into a state of mourning, grief, and instability. Nations that were once strong, like Wakanda for example, were left leaderless and had to rebuild from the ground up. Banks would have shut down due to defaulted loans and mortgages, and the economy would have fallen into a depression worse than what's ever been seen. It's been a varying theory if, along with human life, if animals were snapped away too. In this theory, we're going to say yes, meaning that there would be an initial food shortage for those who remained after the original blip. The governments were left shattered, and at the time of Endgame still faced total anarchy. The world is in shambles, but was doing the best it could to build some kind of system for those who remained. Then the Vanished returned to a world that really had no room for them. Let's begin with housing. The reality that many of the Vanished would have to face is the loss of their homes. After 5 years of non-payment, of course the banks would begin to foreclose on any of the homes left behind. And the same effect would have been seen for those who lived in an apartment, which now has other tenants living inside. At the time of Spider-Man Far From Home, which is set months after Endgame, local programs have been put into place to help begin with the rehoming process. However, again, this is months after the blip. And secondly, this is in New York. If the MCU population pre-snap was anywhere near real life, this means that in New York alone, possibly 9 million people, half of the current New York City population, vanished and then returned. Many of them, unless they could track down their relatives or friends, would be homeless and would deal with the coming rise in crime firsthand. Next, let's have a chat about food supply, and for that matter, supply in general. A consequence of the initial blip would be the closure of businesses, a lack of farming, and a lack of trade as nations refocus efforts on the home front. Much like the hospital, the world would not have the resources to support the vanished, nor those who survived the initial blip. This would especially be an issue in already impoverished nations, who have yet to receive some type of support from their failing government. Lastly, let's talk about the job market. Unlike Monica Rambeau, who worked for SWORD and then had a job waiting for her whenever she returned, this is unlikely for the general population. As we mentioned before, many of the family-run mom-and-pop shops would have likely closed up shop due to the lack of business and lack of funds. The same probably could be said for some corporations like Walmart. Even if businesses stayed open, it's been 5 years. Someone else has taken your job, and with the current economy as shaken up as it is, initially, I don't see a rapid rise in employment happening anytime soon simply because the funding to pay these people wouldn't be there. What we mentioned so far is only a slice of the cake that is the issues that the world now faces. I don't even want to get into the political side of things, such as representation, reholding elections for those who were previously in office, etc. It just sounds messy. The thought of it makes me want to hurl, so no, not going there. But as you can see, bringing back approximately 3.5 billion people at one time was not the answer, as it disrupts the already challenging process of moving past the initial blip. Also, unfortunately, the worst has yet to come. At some point in the future, the universe will settle. Systems will be rebuilt to support the citizens of the world, and the blip will be a thing of the past. From this perspective, we should be able to celebrate, right? Despite the initial challenges, the Avengers are the heroes who truly saved the day, and now the world can finally move on. However, we have to ask the question, even though the world can now sustain the current population, how long can it do so? And was Thanos ideologically correct? From Thanos' perspective, it's simple. He says himself,
"This universe is finite, its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist."
Also, it's not like Thanos is speaking out of his butt when he states this. He's seen the effects firsthand with the destruction of Titan. Thanos has also seen the side effects of wiping out half of a civilization. When Thanos touched down on Gamora's home planet, Zenhubri, the Zenhubri people were struggling to survive. Children were hungry, starving, and in the direction they were heading, they faced extinction. However, look at the planet now. No one has to worry where their next meal will come from, and the planet's thriving. We can estimate that it's been around 20 to 30 years since Thanos balanced the planet, so the question to ask is, if the Avengers simply allowed things to settle, would the Earth eventually benefit? Overpopulation is a serious problem the world faces, as more people equals more resources being used. As Thanos preaches that he is inevitable, so is the day those resources run out, and we have to Wall-E our way off our blue world. However, does having the population halt the coming future, or at least give us more time? A counter-argument that many theorists have presented is that Thanos was still wrong, because no matter what he does, the population would eventually rise again and reach the levels it was pre-snap. This I can agree with, but it doesn't mean Thanos wasn't 100% incorrect in his reasoning. Rather than focus on the population, Thanos should have thought about overconsumption and pollution. If we use the state of the Earth today, no one is talking about needing to cut the rate children are being born. That would be terrifying. What officials are focusing on are how resources are being used and what can be done to regulate pollution levels. However, as many have stated, the time to figure that out is running out, which ties back into Thanos. Although evil, what Thanos did was give the universe a reset, a chance to restructure systems that could better handle a large population, and a bit of extra time to figure it out with half of its people. In a world of chaos, this This was the moment the remaining world leaders could come together and try to find a solution to the problem, find some kind of stability, and then work to answer the question, how do we maintain the progress we've made as the population grows rather than trying to figure it out when it's nearly too late? Due to the Avengers, that's no longer an option. And now the world faces a bigger issue that we've mentioned before. The current resources the planet has is likely only enough to support half the population. Until that issue can be resolved, this means a faster rate of consumption, a higher rate of pollution, and the timetable for us to get off this rock has sped up significantly. It stinks this video couldn't be about the next Avenger who's soon to join the team, or what villain is plotting in the shadows. However, this is the reality that the common people face. It's the reality the common people have always had to face after the Avengers swoop in and, quote, save the day. This time, rather than a city being destroyed, they brought down the eventual end of the world. Were you or anyone you know affected by the blip? Maybe you're out of work, dealing with a shortage of resources in your small town, or the economic collapse. Give us a call at 1-800-BLIPPED, and we'll help you clean up the dust left behind by the Avengers.